Welcome. Welcome to City 17. You have chosen or been chosen to relocate to one of our finest remaining urban centers. I thought so much of City 17 that I elected to establish my administration here in the citadel so thoughtfully provided by our benefactors.
Hollow Knight Silksong. It's a game that was first announced back in 2019, and after 6 long, agonizing years of waiting, it's finally here. With such a long development and so much hype now surrounding the game, I think the biggest question on everyone's mind is, was it worth the wait? And I would have to say, yes. I think Silksong is really great. Not without its flaws, of course, but still great nonetheless. And if you're interested in the game and somehow still haven't played it yet, then I would absolutely recommend doing so now. I'm going to be spoiling most of the game in this video, including its secrets, so you should leave now before I ruin the fun. And no peeking either. First things first, this game looks amazing. Not only is the hand-drawn art absolutely gorgeous, but all of the environments and areas are incredibly detailed, to the point where they feel totally genuine. Like, look at the first area. All of the moss is this lush green color, there are plants and foliage sticking out of the foreground, insects flutter about the screen, water and moss drip from the ceiling, and in the background you can see the caverns stretch further on. There is an insane amount of detail here, and every single area in the game is exactly the same. In deep docks, the corpses of enemies will slowly burn away on hot rock, rain splatters off of Hornet's cloak and Greymore, and in Hunter's March, tiny ants will pick up the bodies of ant soldiers you've recently slain. My jaw actually dropped when I saw that. It's such a cool detail. And whoa, how'd that get there? I also have to commend the use of lighting and particle effects in this game as well. For example, the way the Underworks is lit gives it a really dismal mood, and all of the dust and soot particles floating through the air make the area feel truly filthy. And then there's the Blasted Steppes, which is genuinely one of my favorite looking areas in the game. It has such a heavy atmosphere to it, and the music really accentuates how ancient and holy of a place you're in. The music in Silksong is all around pretty great. I haven't listened to it enough to say if it's better than Hollow Knight's, but it's definitely on par, and I'll continue to highlight some of my favorite tracks throughout this video. But what about the gameplay? Silksong plays pretty similarly to Hollow Knight, which makes sense since it is a sequel. However, Hornet is noticeably more agile than the Knight, and a lot of the returning mechanics have been slightly altered or tweaked. For starters, the heal can now be done in mid-air, and it restores 3 masks at a time instead of 1. To compensate for this, a lot of the enemies now do 2 masks of damage when they hit you, which I personally didn't mind too much, but I do understand why a lot of people have issues with it. It definitely makes the game a lot harder, and I wouldn't be opposed to Team Cherry patching the game to make some of the enemies deal less damage. Unlike the Knight, Hornet can also grab onto ledges as well, which is a small change, but one that I really like. There were definitely plenty of times in Hollow Knight where I would jump towards a ledge, but just barely fall short, so it's nice to have a little extra leeway when platforming. Also, I know the Knight can grab onto ledges if he wants to, the little shit. Something else I like about this ledge grab is that you can jump out of it too, which not only speeds up platforming, but also has the added benefit of looking cool too. I totally love how acrobatic Hornet can look in this game, especially when you're pogoing off objects. Speaking of, the downward attack in Silksong is pretty different from the one in Hollow Knight. In that game, the Knight just does a straight slash down, but in Silksong, Hornet does this diagonal stab instead. This is a change that I think a lot of people have struggled with, and understandably so. This diagonal stab definitely isn't as intuitive as the downward slash in Hollow Knight, and the game doesn't do anything to help you hit your targets either. I wouldn't say it's a bad change though, it just takes some getting used to, and I'll be the first to admit that I absolutely sucked at pogoing off stuff when I started the game. I also don't think anyone playing Hollow Knight for the first time was some instant pogo master either. You had to get good at it, and I think Team Cherry wanted to give returning players something new to master. But if you absolutely hate this diagonal stab, there are crests you can find throughout the game that change your fighting style, and several of them give you a downward slash like in Hollow Knight. These crests also act like the charm screen from that game as well, allowing you to equip different tools that can help you out with exploration or combat. While I definitely miss the insane amount of customization that Hollow Knight's charms offered, I think the new crests and tools are great in their own way too, and all of the consumable weapons are a ton of fun to mess around with. You even get a damn money minigun. Silksong, of course, has a bunch of abilities to acquire too, some returning from Hollow Knight and some new. The dash, wall jump, and double jump all make a return, though this time around, the dash also lets you sprint as well. It's a fun new addition to a familiar ability, and I especially like how Hornet will slow down and then swivel around when you make a turn. It isn't just a cool visual detail either, you do have to account for it if you're trying to platform fast, and it can be counteracted by quickly letting go of the sprint button before turning around. It's a little thing, but it adds more depth to the gameplay. The sprint also lets you do a long jump, and something I noticed is that a lot of platforms seem to be spaced out with this long jump in mind, meaning that a jump from one platform will get you perfectly to the other, and it's really satisfying. As for the new abilities, there's the Drifter's Cloak, which allows you to float in midair and ride air currents, and the Claw Line, which allows you to grapple onto rings and launch yourself towards objects. Both are great. Zipping from enemy to enemy with the Claw Line is extremely fun, and the Drifter's Cloak is super useful during boss fights. Plus, it looks totally goofy too. In typical Metroidvania fashion, most of these abilities are needed to progress further into the game, and they often allow you to traverse the map more efficiently. Which is good, because Silksong is an absolutely massive game. So massive, in fact, that its map is somehow able to make Hollow Knight's map look modest in comparison. Do you remember how there was an entire area in that game hidden behind a breakable wall? Silksong has several of those. One time, I was just wandering around Greymoor when I saw something that looked like a secret, so I went to investigate, and then all of a sudden, I was in an entirely new area, which had crazy cultist enemies and a giant burning effigy for a boss. It was crazy and awesome. One of my favorite things about Hollow Knight is how lost the whole game made me feel on my first playthrough. It felt like a leap straight into the unknown. I had no idea what was in store for me, and no idea where I was going, but I always wanted to keep digging deeper into this vast and wonderful world I had uncovered. That feeling is something that I was hoping Silksong would give to me as well, and I'm very happy to say that it absolutely delivered. There was another time where I was exploring Shellwood, and I didn't have enough money to buy a map, but I was like, I can probably go without it. And then I proceeded to get myself completely lost. I eventually just stumbled into the boss of the area on accident, and it was like 10 times scarier than it should have been because I didn't want to die and lose all my stuff. It was a really memorable experience. But going back to the size of Silksong, I'd like to note that it doesn't just have more areas than Hollow Knight, it also has more of, well, everything, really. Like, if you thought the amount of enemies in Hollow Knight was impressive, well, guess what? Silksong has almost twice as many. And there is just so much variety among them. There are wild bugs, poor bugs, royal bugs, warrior bugs, real bugs, fake bugs, not bugs, half-life bugs. I mean, there are a lot of bugs in this game. I'd especially like to highlight Mr. Edward Scissorbug here for making me pretty quickly regret my decision to try and hit him through a platform. I see what you did there, Team Cherry. I also think there's more NPCs in Silksong too, and this makes its world feel notably different from Hollow Knight's. By the time the knight returns to Hollow Nest, the kingdom has long since fallen, and most of its inhabitants have either succumbed to the infection or gone insane. Farloom, however, is still in its decline. Obviously things aren't great, but there's still a ruling authority, a few towns, a bar, and plenty of NPCs scattered about. The worlds of both games are similar, but they each explore different aspects of a kingdom's collapse, and as a result, Silksong ends up feeling a bit more lively. As for the NPCs themselves, I think they're all great, and while a few of them are similar to some of Hollow Knight's, they are still unique enough to be interesting. For example, the character Chakra is essentially just Cornifer, Coral, and Tiso all rolled into one, but that combination of traits gives her a very unique disposition, and her relationship to the player feels a lot more kindred. Silksong's NPCs are also one of its main sources of side content, as many have side quests or wishes to give to the player. I think these side quests work well on a first playthrough. They give you new things to do in previously explored areas, and the reward for completing them is usually pretty good. The key phrase there, though, was on a first playthrough, and even though I've only played the game once, I can't imagine I'll ever enjoy doing some of these side quests again. Like, the fun of a tracking quest, for example, is trying to follow a trail to its source. But if you already know where something is, then these quests just amount to walking from point A to point B. And I'm certainly not looking forward to collecting 8 randomly spawning bells again, either. I know replayability isn't something that everyone cares about, but it's something that I really value, and it's one of the reasons why I like Hollow Knight so much. I've gotten the true ending in that game over a dozen times now, but unfortunately, I can't see myself doing the same with Silksong. It just has too much stuff in it. Ultimately though, only time will tell, and at the very least, I can still say that these side quests aren't a waste of time, which is something that I really can't say for most other games. With so many things to look at and do in Silksong, it can be pretty easy to get distracted or sidetracked as you play, and that was definitely the case with me. One time, I was trying to head towards an objective in the Whispering Vaults, but along the way I found the oil that's used to upgrade your weapon, so I went back to Belhar to go and talk to the blacksmith, and while I was there I also decided to check out the wishboard too, because why not, right? I ended up accepting the wish to find Tip's brother, Phil, thinking that he probably wouldn't take too long to find, and then afterwards I could just go back to the Whispering Vaults. But instead, I wound up in Birmingham, where I repeatedly got assaulted by several dogs.
I just woke up in a fucking steaming mood, yeah? Because I live in a shithole! Do you know what I mean? Birmingham is a fucking shithole!
Eventually, I found Phil, but by that point, I was too intrigued to leave, so I continued deeper into the area, and after slopping around in Miyazaki's poison swamp for a bit, I found myself in Silent Hill.
In my restless dreams, I see that town. Silent Hill.
Like I said, Silksong is a massive game, and it is so easy to just stumble into a new area by accident. Thankfully though, you can still fast travel to each area via the Bell Beast, who serves as the replacement for Hollow Knight's Stag.
And she's a very good Bell Beast, yes she is!
Ada.
The Bell Beast isn't the only form of fast travel in Silksong though, there's also the Ventricas, which are used to travel throughout the Citadel. And I have to say, the Citadel really reminds me of another Metroidvania, one that might have even had some influence on the genre's name. Hint, hint. Perhaps it's just a coincidence, but it seems like Symphony of the Night had an influence on the design of the Citadel, as it feels pretty reminiscent of Dracula's castle. They're both giant interconnected buildings, they both have a decrepit basement, these cog rooms, and a central chamber which is accessible by 2 long hallways full of tough enemies. Again, that could just be a coincidence, but like, come on. If you're gonna take inspiration from any game though, Symphony of the Night certainly isn't a bad choice, and I think that the Citadel turned out really great. It looks beautiful, it's full of atmosphere, and it even has a platforming section with one of the best songs in the game, just like Hollow Knight. Unlike the White Palace though, I think the Cogwork core fits into the world much more naturally. It isn't disconnected from the main map in any way, and the obstacles actually make sense. There aren't just buzzsaws floating around for no reason. I get the feeling that this was Team Cherry's way of trying to improve on one of Hollow Knight's ideas, and I noticed several other instances of this happening throughout Silksong. For starters, the Relic Collector now takes all of your relics at once. You don't have to give them all individually like you did in Hollow Knight, and the little lore tidbits you get from each relic aren't forced upon the player. Of course, I think one of the reasons why Hollow Knight made you give your relics individually was so that you could only take as much money as you were comfortable with, But in Silksong, you now have a way to permanently store your rosaries so that you don't lose them when you die, which I think makes the player fully responsible for whatever they do lose. I also thought it was really convenient that the blacksmith was put into a town this time around, because in Hollow Knight you really had to go out of your way to get to him. And I especially like how Confessor Gigi was replaced by a consumable item. It completely streamlines the process of recalling your rosaries. Like, seriously, I have never once recalled my shade before in Hollow Knight. It just isn't worth it. But despite making all of these little improvements, Team Cherry weirdly decided to double down on two specific features of Hollow Knight that have been pretty consistently criticized over the years. Firstly, there's the return of benches you have to pay for. In Hollow Knight, you'd only find these kinds of benches every once in a while, but they are all over the place in Silksong. Personally, I didn't have that much of a problem with these benches, but there were also only like 1 or 2 instances across the entire game where I couldn't afford one, and if I consistently couldn't, then it probably would have gotten on my nerves. Plus, it can also just be frustrating to try and save up enough money for an item, only to end up spending it all on benches. But pay-to-win benches aren't the only thing that comes back from Hollow Knight, as Silksong also sees the horrifying return of boss runbacks. I'd say the two biggest offenders in the game are the runbacks to the Last Judge and Grull, with the former taking around 40 seconds and the latter taking around 1 minute and 10 seconds, if you found the secret bench. If you didn't, then get ready to make your way back through the entirety of Bilewater. And since I'm here, I'd like to mention how mixed my feelings are about this area. Like, it's annoying, right? But that's kind of the point of a poison swamp. They're supposed to stress the player out, and in that way, Bilewater absolutely achieves its goal. So I can't really decide if it's good or bad. You know what, let's just say it's good at being bad, that works. Anyway, back to the boss runbacks. Now, I don't think runbacks are inherently bad. In fact, I actually really like them in Demon Souls and Dark Souls 1. But when you have really mechanically complex and challenging bosses that you're pretty much meant to lose to in order to figure out how they work, forcing the player to walk all the way back to them every time they die is just plain mean, and it's a complete waste of their time. What also doesn't help is being forced to fight the same gauntlet of enemies over and over again. Like, I want to fight the actual boss, not a stupid group of lackeys that I've already killed 12 times. This is also why I'm not a huge fan of the High Halls gank either. It's just tedious. I honestly think that Team Cherry should patch the game to let you summon Garmund here or something. It would make the fight so much more enjoyable. Thankfully though, these more annoying fights are pretty rare, and the rest of the game's bosses range from fine to really good. I especially enjoyed the 4th Chorus, the Last Judge, Lace, and the Grandmother Silk. But my all-time favorite boss in Silksong has to be the Cogwork Dancers. It's not a particularly difficult fight, but it's just so unique and fun, and I loved the absolute gut punch it gave me when I killed one of the dancers. I'd like to note that the bosses in Silksong, and the game itself, are really hard. Like, noticeably harder than Hollow Knight, and that game isn't a walk in the park either. For the most part, I enjoyed the challenge, but there were definitely moments where the game became a bit too difficult for my liking, which I touched on before. And I think that's all I have to say about this game. Yep, there's definitely nothing else to talk about. Alright, I know I already gave you all a spoiler warning, but if you haven't gotten the true ending yet, then you might not want to watch this next part. You have been warned. So, if you go out of your way to set up a trap for the Grandmother Silk, then you can unlock a secret third act after you beat the game, which not only gives the world of Farloom a massive makeover, but also has around 15 new bosses to fight, a new ability to get, and 2 new areas to discover. Which is absolutely insane, by the way, and I now fully understand why this game took so long to make. One of the new areas, Lost Redania, is accessed by going into a character's mind, and finding it was one of my favorite moments in the entire game. Following the Green Prince as he reminisced on his past was an absolutely magical experience, and the area's music perfectly captures this feeling of nostalgia and wonder. Seriously, this song is incredible. It's genuinely one of the best pieces of music I've ever heard. Unfortunately though, the boss of this area is pretty disappointing, as it's just a slightly different version of the Cogwork Dancers. I don't hate it, but it's not different enough from the first fight to be anything special. Crust King Khan also left me similarly disappointed as well, and not because I thought he was a bad boss, but because the area he's located in seems to have been changed during development. In the first trailer, it looked like it was going to be a full-sized area, but in the final game, it's just a simple enemy gauntlet. Which I think is a bit of a shame, since the visuals here look really beautiful, and I'd love to see more of them. I will admit that this is just a minor nitpick though, and I completely understand that plans can change over the course of 6 years. But the disappointment doesn't end there, folks. We've still got Nyleth to talk about. Now, I'm someone who actually likes gimmick fights. I think they can be a lot of fun, but if the gimmick isn't very interesting or, enjoyable, then I'm not such a big fan anymore. You spend most of the fight against Nyleth just stuck to a wall, and after a while, it can get pretty tedious. What doesn't help is that Nyleth's guardian, Seth, is far, far more enjoyable to fight too, and I honestly kind of wish that you only had to fight him in order to get Nyleth's heart. Thankfully though, Star Singer Carmelita makes up for some of the other boss' shortcomings by having one of the best fights in the game.
That's what people want me to say, right?
Unfortunately, I don't actually have much to say about Carmelita. I think she looks cool, but I didn't really jive with the actual fight against her. It took me about an hour to beat her, and after 30 minutes of attempts, the fight just started to frustrate me. I still wouldn't call Carmelita a bad boss though, and that's because I think I could eventually come to enjoy her fight if I beat it a few more times. Weirdly enough though, I don't feel the same way about Lost Lace, even though she also took me about an hour to beat. Every time I died to her, I still felt like I was learning something new, and the gradual improvements I would make with each new attempt kept the fight exciting. It was a properly climactic boss to end the game off on, and in general, I thought that Lace worked well as Hornet's rival. I also enjoyed the return of the Abyss as well, and I think it was implemented into Silksong much better than it was in Hollow Knight. If you didn't know, the Abyss wasn't really meant to be in Hollow Knight in the first place, since the Kickstarter stretch goal for it was never reached, but Team Cherry still decided to put it in the game anyways, just without most of the features it was originally supposed to have. This is why the area is so empty, and while I still think that the Abyss has a very unique and off-putting mood because of that, I can't deny that it feels much more like an actual area in Silksong. I especially enjoyed the escape sequence here too. It's a great platforming challenge, and having the music from the first trailer play while you make your way through it was an absolutely brilliant decision. Hearing it again really felt like everything had come full circle, and it made me think back on where Silksong first started. I don't think anyone could have foreseen that this simple stretch goal for a second playable character would turn into an entire enormous game of its own, and I really have to commend Team Cherry's dedication and effort over the years. Silksong isn't perfect, but no game is, and despite how critical I know I can sound sometimes, I really, really enjoyed the experience I had with it. I got nearly everything I wanted out of Silksong, And while I think it might not be as replayable as Hollow Knight, it doesn't really have to be. Where Hollow Knight is more like a 5-course meal, Silksong is more like an all-you-can-eat buffet, and I think that difference makes each game stand apart from one another. Of course, Silksong also has some difficulty issues, but with a few patches, I think those problems can be resolved, and in a year's time, I have no doubt that Silksong will be an even better game than it already is. Plus, the entire game is only $20, which is half the amount of hours I spent playing it. I almost feel like I'm robbing Team Cherry with a price tag that low, and it puts the rest of the industry to complete and utter shame. So, those are my thoughts on Silksong, but before I go, I feel like I should answer one more question. Is Silksong better than Hollow Knight? And to that, I'd have to say...
No.
But I don't say that because I think Silksong is more flawed than Hollow Knight or anything. That game has its issues too. Instead, the reason I like Hollow Knight more is because of the experience I had with it. When I first played Hollow Knight, I had no idea what I was getting into. I just saw that it was coming to the Switch in a direct, thought it looked cool, and started playing it. And that first playthrough was just absolutely magical. Like, I had never played anything like Hollow Knight ever before. But with Silksong, I already had played a game like it before. I had an idea of what to expect going into it, and because of that, my experience with the game just wasn't as special. But that's just my very biased opinion, and I think you could totally argue that Silksong's the better game. And as the sequel to what is considered to be one of the greatest games ever made, I think that's pretty damn impressive. Actually, forget everything I said. There's Baby Hornet in this game. It's perfect. 10 out of 10.